My name is Olivia and I am 32 years old. My parents helped my brother buy a house and told me to rent somewhere. So I used my savings to buy my first property, then kept buying more. When he asked about my house, I said, "Which one?" Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to build your own empire after your family underestimated your worth. Growing up in the suburbs of Chicago, I always knew there was a clear hierarchy in my family. My brother Brandon was the golden child, the investment, the future patriarch. I was just the daughter, an afterthought meant to be quiet and accommodating. I had spent my entire life trying to earn a fraction of the pride my parents, Thomas and Cynthia, freely showered on Brandon. I became a financial auditor, worked grueling hours, and maintained a flawless credit score. Brandon leaped from one failed sales job to another, funding a lifestyle he could not afford on credit cards and parental bailouts. The ultimate betrayal happened exactly 5 years ago during our annual Thanksgiving dinner. I had spent the entire morning cooking, trying to create the perfect holiday atmosphere. Brandon arrived late with his wife Jasmine. Jasmine is a stunning African-American woman who works as a luxury lifestyle influencer, meaning she spends her days posting photos of expensive handbags and designer brunches online while secretly drowning in debt. She swept into the dining room, complaining about the drive while Brandon immediately asked when we were eating, halfway through the turkey and stuffing. My mother tapped her spoon against her wine glass. Her face was flushed with excitement as she stood up to command the table. "We have a very special family blessing to announce," Cynthia declared, beaming at Brandon and Jasmine. "Your father and I have decided to liquidate a large portion of our retirement savings to give Brandon $140,000. It is the down payment for that gorgeous four-bedroom house in the Oak Brook neighborhood." The room felt like all the oxygen had been sucked out of it. I sat frozen, my fork hovering halfway to my mouth. $140,000. Just 6 months prior, my father had suffered a medical emergency. He needed surgery and his insurance deductible was exorbitant. I had drained $10,000 from my own hard-earned savings to pay his medical bills out of pocket. At the time, with tears in his eyes, Thomas had sworn he would pay me back. Hi, and my mother had even promised they would match my savings to help me put a modest down payment on a small starter condo. I looked at my parents, waiting for the punchline, but they were busy toasting Brandon. "Mom, Dad." I started, my voice tight but controlled. "That is a huge amount of money. What about the promise we discussed? The down payment for my condo?" Thomas set his wine glass down, his jovial expression instantly hardening into annoyance. He looked at me as if I had just tracked mud across his pristine carpet. "You are a single woman, Olivia. Buying property is a complete waste for you. Just rent somewhere. Brandon is a married man. He is the head of his household. He needs an estate to raise a proper family." The sheer audacity of his words felt like a physical slap. I had literally paid to keep this man healthy, and he was dismissing my entire future because I did not have a husband. Jasmine leaned across the table, adjusting her flawless silk press, a malicious smirk playing on her lips. "Let us be real, Olivia," she chimed in, her tone dripping with fake sympathy. "A financial auditor salary is not getting you approved for a mortgage in a decent neighborhood anyway. You should just be happy for your brother instead of making this about your jealousy. Look at the reality of your situation." Brandon laughed, cutting into his turkey. "Yeah, sis. Do not be bitter just because Dad knows a good investment when he sees one. I am building generational wealth." Generational wealth. He could not even pay his own car insurance without calling our mother crying. I looked at the four of them, a united front of toxicity and delusion. For years I had craved their validation. I had played the good, responsible daughter, hoping that one day they would see my value. In that dining room, listening to the clinking of their glasses, the illusion shattered completely. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not throw my plate across the room, even though every fiber of my being wanted to. Instead, I carefully wiped my mouth with my linen napkin, placed it neatly beside my plate, and stood up. I offered them a calm, perfectly polite smile. "Congratulations on the house, Brandon. I am sure you will take excellent care of it." Without another word, I grabbed my coat and walked out into the freezing Chicago night. As I drove away from that suburban house, I felt a strange, cold clarity wash over me. They had made their choices and now I would make mine. The very next morning, I completely changed my financial strategy. I had $50,000 saved up, money I was planning to use to finally pay off my student loans in one lump sum. Instead, I opened my laptop and began researching distressed properties. With my background in financial auditing, I knew how to read tax documents, assess property values, and navigate municipal auctions. I registered an anonymous limited liability company called Apex Holdings. 2 weeks later, I attended a county tax auction and used my entire savings to buy a rundown, neglected duplex on the city outskirts in cash. I spent every evening and weekend covered in paint and drywall dust fixing it up myself. I rented out both units, took the rental income, and immediately reinvested it. I refinanced the duplex, pulled the equity out, and bought a 4-unit apartment building. Then I bought a commercial strip mall. Then a block of townhomes. I lived like a ghost. I drove a beat-up sedan, wore cheap clothes, and told my family absolutely nothing about my life. When they bothered to call, which was rare, I let them believe I was just scraping by in a miserable little rental. I let them mock my auditing job. I let them brag about Brandon's massive Oak Brook estate, the luxury cars Jasmine leased, and the lavish vacations they took on my parents' dime. Every insult they hurled at me became fuel. Every snide comment Jasmine made on social media about her high-end lifestyle only made me work harder, calculate sharper, and invest smarter. It was grueling work. While my peers were out enjoying their weekends, I was reviewing inspection reports, negotiating with contractors, and managing tenant disputes. I learned the real estate market inside and out, spotting trends before they became mainstream. I partnered with a brilliant, ruthless real estate attorney named Elijah, who helped me structure my assets to ensure absolute privacy and maximum protection. Elijah handled all the public-facing aspects of my empire. To the world, I was just a quiet auditor living a modest life. To the market, I was becoming a quiet force. My parents and my brother remained oblivious. During our infrequent holiday phone calls, they would spend the entire time detailing Brandon's supposed successes. Thomas would boast about the equity Brandon was building in the Oak Brook house. Cynthia would gush over Jasmine's latest sponsored social media post. I would simply listen, offer a polite acknowledgement, and end the call as quickly as possible. I no longer needed their approval because I had found my own worth in the tangible, concrete reality of the empire I was building from the ground up. 5 years passed in the blink of an eye. My anonymous company, Apex Holdings, now owned a dozen highly lucrative real estate properties across the greater Chicago area, generating massive passive income. I sat on a real estate portfolio worth millions. I had completely transformed my life, yet my family still saw me as the helpless single woman they had discarded at Thanksgiving. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon, and I was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my high-rise corporate office, reviewing a quarterly profit report, when my personal cell phone buzzed. The caller ID flashed my mother's name. Cynthia had not called me in over 6 months, not since she needed help figuring out a complicated tax form she had messed up. I took a slow sip of my coffee, watching the city traffic below, and answered the call. "Hello, Mom." I did not even get a chance to finish the greeting before a hysterical, breathless screech pierced my eardrum. "Olivia, thank God you have to help us right now." Cynthia was sobbing so hard she was practically choking on her own words. "It is Brandon. He is losing everything. The bank is taking the house. You have to get $50,000 today, or your brother is going to be out on the street." I held the phone a few inches away from my ear as my mother continued her frantic screaming. She was hyperventilating, her words tumbling over each other in a desperate rush. I asked her to calm down and explain exactly what was happening. Cynthia took a ragged breath and confessed everything. The perfect facade my brother Brandon and his wife Jasmine had presented to the world for the last 5 years was a complete lie. The economic downturn had hit Brandon hard and he had lost his sales job. Instead of cutting back, Jasmine had doubled down on her spending. As an aspiring luxury lifestyle influencer, she refused to let her social media followers see struggle. She had maxed out every credit card they had on designer bags and expensive trips. Brandon had been too terrified to stop her. To keep up appearances, they simply stopped paying their mortgage. They had not made a single payment to the bank in 8 months. Now the bank had initiated foreclosure proceedings, and the house was scheduled to be auctioned off. Cynthia demanded that I immediately go to my bank, take out a $50,000 personal loan, and stop the foreclosure. She said it was the only way to save the family reputation. I felt a surge of absolute disbelief. I asked her why she and Thomas did not just give him the money since he was their golden child. Cynthia burst into fresh tears, admitting they had already drained their own savings. They were completely tapped out. I was their last resort. I took a slow sip of my coffee and looked out over the Chicago skyline. No, I said calmly. The line went dead silent for a full 3 seconds. Then I heard a scuffle on the other end, and my father Thomas ripped the phone away from my mother. His voice boomed through the speaker, heavy with rage. "You listen to me right now," he barked. "Your brother is about to be homeless. You have no husband, no children, and no real responsibilities. You are just a cold-blooded spinster. It is time you actually do your duty for this family and help the people who matter. Go to the bank right now and get that loan." The sheer audacity of his demand was staggering. 5 years ago, they had handed Brandon $140,000 and told me to go rent an apartment. They mocked my career and dismissed my future. Now, standing in my multi-million-dollar office listening to the same man demand I plunge myself into debt to save his son, I felt nothing but cold resolve. "I am not taking out a loan for a grown man who cannot pay his own bills," I replied, my voice perfectly steady. "You made him the head of the household. Let him figure it out. Have a nice day, Thomas." I hung up the phone before he could scream another word. I immediately went to my settings and blocked both of their numbers. I blocked Brandon and Jasmine too. I walked back to my desk, set my phone down, and let out a long, slow breath. The emotional blackmail that used to cripple me now felt completely powerless. I checked my watch. I had a meeting in 20 minutes that required my full attention. I grabbed my briefcase and took the private elevator down to the lobby. My driver was waiting to take me across town to the law offices of my real estate attorney, Elijah. Elijah was 38 years old, razor-sharp, and absolutely ruthless when it came to corporate law. I was the only person in the world who knew the full extent of my wealth. When I walked into his corner office, he was already sitting at his massive oak desk, reviewing a stack of documents. He looked up and offered a rare, genuine smile. "Olivia," he said, gesturing to the leather chair opposite him. "Right on time as always. We have a lot of ground to cover today." Over the past 5 years, Elijah and I had built a remarkably efficient machine. Under the shield of my company, Apex Holdings, I had acquired 12 properties across the city. We had multi-family apartment buildings, a commercial strip mall, and several high-end townhomes. Every property was cash flowing beautifully, and the equity we had built was staggering. I had poured my deep understanding of financial auditing into every single acquisition, while Elijah handled the aggressive negotiations. We spent the first 30 minutes of our meeting reviewing the quarterly profit and loss statements. Apex Holdings was performing 20% better than our most optimistic projections. The rental income was pouring in, and we had a massive amount of liquid capital sitting in our corporate accounts just waiting to be deployed. Elijah closed the financial folder and leaned forward, his dark eyes gleaming with business anticipation. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a thick stack of paper. "This just came in from the county clerk this morning," he said, sliding the documents across the desk toward me. "It is the updated list for the bank foreclosure auctions happening at the end of the week. There are a few distressed properties here that fit our exact acquisition model. Prime locations, heavily defaulted, ready for a cash buyer to gut them and flip them for a premium." I picked up the list and began scanning the addresses. My eyes flew down the columns. I was looking for neighborhoods with high appreciation potential. Suddenly, my eyes stopped on a very familiar address. My breath caught slightly in my throat. I read the line again to make sure I was not mistaken. Right there at the very top of the distressed property list was a 4-bedroom estate located in Oakbrook. I looked at the listed owners of the defaulted mortgage. The names printed in stark black ink were Brandon and Jasmine. The debt amount listed was staggering. They had not just defaulted on the primary mortgage, they had taken out a second mortgage, completely draining every ounce of value from the property before finally stopping payments altogether. The bank was rushing the auction to recoup their massive losses. I stared at the paper, the irony of the situation washing over me in waves. This was the exact house my parents had thrown $140,000 at 5 years ago. The house that was supposed to represent Brandon building generational wealth. The house they had used to mock my single status and my career. Now, it was just another distressed asset on a county auction block about to be sold to the highest bidder. Elijah noticed my sudden silence. He followed my gaze to the top of the page. "You know that property?" he asked, his tone shifting to professional curiosity. "I know it very well," I replied, keeping my eyes on the address. "It is a prime piece of real estate in a highly coveted neighborhood. The current owners completely squandered it. If we purchase it at the auction price, we could easily see a 40% profit margin. It is the perfect flip." Elijah quickly pulled up the satellite images and historical tax records on his computer. He nodded in agreement as he ran the numbers. "The underlying value is incredibly strong," he confirmed. "The bank is pricing it aggressively just to clear it off their books. We have more than enough liquid capital in the Apex accounts to make a preemptive cash offer before it even hits the public bidding floor. Do you want me to initiate the paperwork?" I looked at Elijah, a slow, calculated smile spreading across my face. "Yes," I said. "Prepare a full cash bid through the company. I want that property, and I want the acquisition finalized by the end of the week. Do whatever it takes to secure it." The fact that the property belonged to the brother who had mocked my poverty was just poetic justice. The universe truly had an incredible sense of timing. Just as Elijah was printing the final forms for my signature, my cell phone vibrated violently on the desk. I had already blocked my parents and my brother, so I naturally assumed it was a client calling. Instead, I saw the name of my executive assistant flashing on the screen. I answered the call immediately, keeping my tone crisp and highly professional. "Yes," I said. My assistant sounded completely panicked, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Olivia, I am so sorry to interrupt your meeting," she stammered. "But there is a massive situation happening down in the main lobby of the firm right now. Your brother Brandon and his wife Jasmine just bypassed the security desk. They are screaming your name and causing an absolute scene in front of all the partners. They are demanding to see you right now, refusing to leave until you face them." I thanked my executive assistant, betraying none of the surprise I felt. I ended the call and looked at my real estate attorney. Elijah raised an eyebrow, having heard the frantic tone through the receiver. I smoothed the wrinkles from my tailored blazer. "My brother and his wife are staging a public ambush in our lobby," I explained. "They are screaming my name." Elijah reached for his desk phone to call building security. I held up my hand. "No," I said, a new strategy rapidly forming in my mind. "We are going to use this. They want a public spectacle to force my hand. I am going to give them exactly what they need, just not the way they expect." I outlined my plan. His calculating smile returned. He pulled a generic matte black business card from his drawer and handed it to me. The card simply read, "Apex Rentals." I took the card and headed for the elevators. As the doors slid closed, I took a deep breath. For years, the mere thought of a public confrontation with my family would have sent me into a panic attack. I had been conditioned to keep the peace and never embarrass Thomas and Cynthia. But the woman descending to the ground floor was no longer the timid daughter they had bullied at Thanksgiving. I was about to play my brother like a pawn. When the elevator doors opened onto the marble lobby, the chaos was instantly apparent. Brandon was pacing aggressively near the reception desk, his face flushed red with anger. Beside him stood Jasmine. She was dressed in a full luxury outfit carrying an expensive handbag, but her usual haughty demeanor had been replaced by a loud theatrical display of victimhood. Jasmine was actively sobbing, wiping imaginary tears from her perfectly contoured face. She projected her voice so that every administrative assistant and senior partner passing through the lobby could hear her. "I cannot believe she is doing this to her own flesh and blood," Jasmine cried out to a bewildered receptionist. "We are about to be thrown out on the street. She has the money to save us, and she is just sitting up there letting us drown." I walked across the lobby, my heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. The sound caught Brandon's attention. He pointed an accusing finger at me. "There she is," he shouted, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. the cold-blooded spinster herself. Are you happy now, Olivia? Are you happy that you are ruining our lives? I stopped a few feet away from them, maintaining a perfectly relaxed posture. I did not raise my voice, nor did I show a single ounce of embarrassment. Brandon, I said smoothly, you are making a fool of yourself in my place of business. I suggest you lower your voice and leave the premises before I have you arrested for trespassing. Jasmine stepped forward, attempting to physically intimidate me. She towered over me in her designer heels, her dark eyes flashing with desperate rage. Do not you dare threaten my husband, she hissed. You owe us this money, Olivia. Thomas and Cynthia said you have plenty of savings. You are going to go to your bank right now and wire $50,000 to our account to stop the foreclosure. I looked at Jasmine, studying the genuine panic hiding just beneath her aggressive posturing. The influencer lifestyle she had curated was collapsing around her. I turned my attention back to my brother. Your financial illiteracy is not my responsibility, Brandon. You stopped paying your mortgage 8 months ago. You took out a second mortgage to fund your wife's shopping addiction. I am not bailing you out. Brandon lunged forward, but before he could close the distance between us, the firm's security detail finally arrived. 3 large guards stepped between us, placing their hands firmly on Brandon's chest to push him back. Sir, you need to vacate the building immediately, the head of security commanded. Jasmine shrieked as one of the guards grabbed her arm to escort her toward the revolving doors. Get your hands off me, she yelled, struggling against the guard's grip. You cannot do this to us, Olivia. We have nowhere else to go. The bank is locking the doors on Friday. We are going to be living in our car. I watched them being shoved toward the exit, their dignity completely shattered. Right before the guards pushed them through the glass doors, I stepped forward and held up my hand. The security team paused. I reached into my blazer pocket, pulled out the matte black business card Elijah had given me, and casually tossed it onto the marble floor at Brandon's feet. I do not have $50,000 for you, I said, my voice cutting through the tense silence of the lobby. I am certainly not going to pay the debt you owe on a house you never deserved. But I do know this property management company. They take in desperate tenants with foreclosures and completely trashed credit histories. Go beg them for a roof over your head. Brandon stared at the small card resting on the floor. His pride warred with his absolute desperation. For a second I thought he might kick it away. But the reality of his impending homelessness won. He snatched the card off the floor, glaring at me with pure hatred. You are dead to us, Olivia, he spat. Do not ever come crawling back to this family. I smiled warmly. I would not dream of it. I signaled the guards and they forcefully shoved my brother and his wife out into the bustling Chicago street. I watched through the glass as they stood on the sidewalk, humiliated, defeated, and completely out of options. I turned around, apologized to the receptionist for the disturbance, and calmly walked back to the private elevators. My pulse was steady. My conscience was completely clear. The trap had been perfectly set. Now I just had to wait for them to walk right into it. 3 days later, the inevitable happened. The bank finalized the foreclosure on the Oak Brook estate. Brandon and Jasmine were legally evicted, forced to pack whatever belongings they could fit into a rented moving truck. Thomas and Cynthia tried to help them secure a new luxury apartment, but the foreclosure acted like poison. No reputable landlord was willing to sign a lease with a couple who had defaulted so massively on a mortgage. They were entirely blacklisted from the housing market, with options exhausted. Brandon swallowed his pride. He dialed the number on the card I tossed at him. Sitting in his office, Elijah answered the secondary line, slipping into the persona of a no-nonsense property manager for Apex Rentals. He listened as Brandon explained their situation, minimizing his financial faults, and begging for an immediate move-in date. Elijah played the role perfectly. He feigned hesitation, cited their abysmal credit history, and demanded strict compliance from high-risk tenants. Brandon pleaded, promising to pay their rent on time and follow every single rule. Elijah finally relented. He told them he had one available unit on the industrial outskirts of the city. It was a cramped apartment in a highly undesirable neighborhood, but it was a roof over their heads. Desperate, Brandon and Jasmine drove straight to the Apex Rentals management office to secure the unit before it was gone. The clerk handed them a brutal, ironclad lease agreement. The monthly rent was set at a premium rate for high-risk tenants. The contract included massive financial penalties for late payments and an automatic eviction clause if they missed a single payment. Jasmine cried when she saw the photos of the tiny kitchen and stained carpeting, but they had no other choice. With shaking hands, Brandon signed the lease agreement, legally binding himself to the draconian terms. Elijah called me 20 minutes later as I sat in my downtown condominium, looking out over the glittering city lights. "The paperwork is finalized and filed," he said, a note of triumph in his voice. "They took the bait completely. They have the keys, and their first month of rent has already cleared our corporate account." I let out a soft laugh. Brandon and Jasmine were moving into a miserable apartment, believing they had narrowly escaped homelessness through a desperate lifeline provided by an anonymous corporate landlord. They had no idea the company they just signed their lives over to was owned and operated by me. They had no idea that every single month, their extortionate rent money was going to flow directly into my personal bank accounts. They were now legally bound to the sister they had endlessly mocked. I was their landlord, and I was going to hold them to every single letter of that contract. The game had truly just begun. I poured myself a glass of expensive wine to celebrate. 6 months passed. For my brother Brandon and his wife Jasmine, those 6 months were an absolute nightmare of their own making. They were now living in a cramped two-bedroom apartment on the gritty industrial outskirts of the city. It was a massive downgrade from their sprawling suburban estate, and the reality of their new life was crushing them. Jasmine, who still desperately tried to maintain her image as a luxury lifestyle influencer, was forced to film all her social media content against a single blank white wall in their tiny living room, so her followers would not see the stained carpets and cheap laminate countertops. The lease they had signed with Apex Rentals was unforgiving. I had personally instructed Elijah to draft a contract that left absolutely no room for error. Rent was due on the first of the month by 5 in the evening. If the payment was even 1 minute late, an automatic $200 penalty was applied to their account. If the balance remained unpaid by the 5th of the month, a formal 3-day pay or quit eviction notice was taped directly to their front door. There were strict clauses against any unauthorized renovations, meaning Jasmine could not even paint the drab beige walls to make the space more tolerable. They were not allowed to have guests stay for more than 2 consecutive nights, and noise complaints resulted in immediate fines. Brandon, who was used to my parents bailing him out of every financial mistake, found himself trapped in a rigid system he could not manipulate. He tried calling the Apex property management line several times to negotiate extensions or complain about a leaky faucet, but the staff had been instructed to handle his requests strictly by the book. He was just another high-risk tenant to them. Every single month on the first day of the month, Brandon transferred his rent payment. And every single month, that money dropped directly into my corporate holding account. I was literally building my wealth using the cash he scrubbed together. While my brother and his wife suffocated under the weight of their new reality, I was experiencing the most lucrative period of my entire professional career. The morning after the bank finalized the foreclosure on their Oak Brook estate, Elijah attended the county auction on behalf of Apex Holdings. As we had anticipated, the bidding was sluggish. The bank wanted to offload the bad debt quickly. Elijah executed our cash bid flawlessly, acquiring the 4-bedroom suburban house for a fraction of its actual market value. The moment the deed was transferred to my company, I sent a demolition crew straight to the property. Walking through the house my parents had thrown $140,000 into was a surreal experience. Brandon and Jasmine had completely trashed the place. The hardwood floors were ruined, the custom kitchen cabinets were damaged, and the master bathroom looked like it had not been cleaned in a year. They had lived like reckless children, assuming the bank would simply wait forever for their money. I oversaw the entire renovation process. I gutted the kitchen, installed modern quartz countertops, refinished the original hardwood, and completely upgraded the landscaping. I turned the house from a neglected foreclosure into a stunning move-in-ready suburban dream home. The total renovation took exactly 4 months. When I listed the property back on the market, it caused a bidding war among wealthy young families looking to move into the Oak Brook School District. Within a week, I accepted an all-cash offer from a cardiovascular surgeon. The final sale price yielded a massive 40% profit margin. I had taken the physical symbol of my brother's golden child status, the very house my parents had used to mock my single lifestyle, and turned it into pure capital. Meanwhile, Thomas and Cynthia were growing increasingly desperate. They had drained their retirement accounts to give Brandon that initial down payment, and now they had absolutely nothing to show for it. Their son was living in a depressing industrial apartment, and their own financial security was permanently damaged. Predictably, they decided that I was the solution to their self-inflicted crisis. They wanted the $50,000 they had originally demanded, and they were no longer willing to accept my silence as an answer. Since I had blocked their phone numbers and ignored their emails, Thomas took it upon himself to track me down physically. Using his old connections at a local credit bureau, my father managed to run a background check to find my current residential address. I had kept my personal residence entirely separate from my business holdings for safety reasons, but my name was still attached to the utility bills. Thomas found the address, wrote it down, and told Cynthia to get in the car. They were going to pay their ungrateful daughter a surprise visit and demand she write a check to save her brother. My parents expected to drive into a rundown neighborhood. They fully believed the lie they had created about me. In their minds, I was a struggling accountant who could barely afford groceries, living in some miserable cheap rental because I had no husband to provide for me. They spent the entire drive into the city complaining about my supposed failures and practicing the harsh lecture they were going to deliver. However, as their car navigated through the busy downtown streets, the scenery began to change. The rundown buildings they anticipated never materialized. Instead, their GPS directed them into the Gold Coast, the most exclusive and expensive district in downtown Chicago. Thomas pulled his sedan up to a towering, ultra-luxury glass high-rise condominium building. He looked at the address on his phone, then up at the building, completely bewildered. The entrance featured a circular driveway paved with imported cobblestone. Uniformed valets were busy parking sleek sports cars and luxury SUVs. Tall, polished brass doors opened into a breathtaking lobby featuring massive crystal chandeliers, imported marble floors, and an immense modern art installation. This was not a cheap rental. This was a fortress of extreme wealth. Cynthia looked out the passenger window, her eyes wide with confusion. "Thomas," she said, her voice wavering, "are you sure you wrote down the right address? This cannot possibly be where Olivia lives. Look at this place." Thomas scowled, checking his phone again. "This is the address the credit bureau gave me," he muttered. "She must be making a massive financial mistake. She is probably renting a tiny studio closet in the back of the building just to pretend she has money. It is exactly the kind of irresponsible behavior I would expect from her. We are going inside." They parked down the street to avoid the valet fee and marched back to the grand entrance. As they pushed through the brass doors, the sheer opulence of the lobby hit them like a physical blow. The air smelled of expensive citrus and cedar. Residents wearing tailored suits and designer coats walked past them, nodding politely to the concierge staff. Thomas and Cynthia, wearing their casual suburban weekend clothes, stuck out immediately. They approached the main security desk. A sharply dressed concierge looked up, offering a polite but highly trained smile. "Good afternoon," he said. "How may I assist you today?" Thomas puffed out his chest, attempting to project authority. "I am here to see my daughter Olivia. She lives in this building. Tell her Thomas and Cynthia are downstairs." The concierge tapped a few keys on his polished computer terminal. He checked the resident directory, his eyes scanning the screen. He found my name, and then he saw the strict security protocol attached to my profile. I had specifically instructed the building management that under no circumstances was anyone allowed up to my floor without my direct prior authorization. "I am sorry, sir," the concierge said, his tone remaining perfectly polite but firm. "We have a strict security policy. I cannot announce uninvited guests, and I certainly cannot grant you access to the residential elevators without the resident's explicit permission. You will need to contact her directly and have her authorize your entry." Thomas slammed his hand down on the marble desk, his face flushing with anger. "Do not tell me I need permission to see my own daughter. I am her father. I know she rents a unit in this building. You are going to let me up right now, or I am going to have a very serious conversation with your building manager about how you treat families." The concierge did not even blink. "I am the building manager, sir," he replied smoothly, "and I must ask you to lower your voice. This is a private residence. If you cannot contact her yourself, I must ask you to leave the lobby immediately." Cynthia grabbed Thomas by the arm, pulling him back before security could intervene. Thomas glared at this concierge, his mind racing with furious, entitled calculations. As he looked around at the crystal chandeliers, the velvet seating areas, and the sheer luxury surrounding him, a malicious idea began to take root in his mind. He was absolutely infuriated by the fact that I was living in such an extravagant building while his golden boy Brandon was suffering in an industrial apartment. Thomas decided right then and there that I did not deserve to live in this high-rise. In his twisted logic, I was just wasting money on an expensive lease to show off money that rightfully belonged to the family. He hatched a desperate, highly illegal plan. He was going to steal my lease. He was going to figure out how to transfer the rental agreement for this luxury unit directly into Brandon's name and throw me out onto the street. He smiled, grabbed Cynthia's arm, and walked out into the Chicago afternoon completely unaware that he was about to trigger his own absolute destruction. Thomas wasted no time putting his entirely criminal plan into motion. As soon as he and Cynthia returned to their suburban home, he went straight into his dimly lit home office and booted up his computer. He still possessed a lingering toxic arrogance from his days in middle management, a highly dangerous belief that he could simply talk his way into getting whatever he wanted without any consequences. He used an online public records database to find the corporate contact number for the property management group overseeing my luxury high-rise building. In his mind, I was just an unmarried, insignificant daughter, hoarding financial resources that rightfully belonged to his golden son. He picked up the phone, dialed the management office, and prepared to deliver the manipulative performance of his life. When the senior building manager answered the line, Thomas immediately adopted a grave, deeply concerned tone. He introduced himself as my loving father and falsely claimed to be the primary financial guarantor on my lease. He spun a horrific, fabricated story, claiming I was currently suffering from a severe mental breakdown that left me unable to function. He told the manager I was completely incapacitated, emotionally unstable, and entirely unable to fulfill the monthly financial obligations of my expensive rental contract. He painted a false picture of a desperate, caring family, stepping in to quickly mitigate a sudden crisis. He boldly demanded that the management office immediately void my active lease and transfer the rental agreement directly into the name of his son, Brandon. He smoothly assured the manager that Brandon was a highly stable family man who would assume the rent payments without a single issue. The senior building manager sat at his polished desk, listening to this elaborate web of lies in absolute stunned silence. Under normal circumstances, a call like this regarding a standard residential tenant would require a massive legal review involving attorneys' signed power of attorney forms and verified medical affidavits. But these were certainly not normal circumstances, and I was definitely not a standard tenant. The manager knew exactly who I was. I did not just rent a small unit in that magnificent building. I owned the entire luxury penthouse floor outright, holding the property deed completely free and clear of any bank mortgage. Furthermore, I was the sitting president of the High-Rise Homeowners Association. The manager knew me personally as a sharp, highly competent, and impeccably professional businesswoman. The manager maintained his strict composure, refusing to let Thomas know that his entire fraudulent scheme was built on a foundation of laughable ignorance. He politely informed Thomas that he would look into the file and abruptly ended the call. The exact moment the line went dead, the manager picked up his private phone and dialed my direct unlisted cell phone number. I was sitting in my corporate office reviewing a new contract with Elijah when the sudden call came through. I put the manager on the speakerphone so Elijah could hear the entire conversation. The manager recounted every single word my father had just said, detailing the absurd claims of my supposed mental breakdown and the arrogant demand to instantly transfer my non-existent lease to Brandon. I stared at Elijah across the desk, the sheer audacity of my father's actions leaving me momentarily breathless. The initial shock quickly crystallized into a cold, lethal anger. My father had just committed identity fraud, attempted theft, and blatant defamation. He was so blinded by his obsession with Brandon that he was willing to illegally render me homeless just to secure a luxury apartment for his golden boy. He truly believed I was a weak, vulnerable target sitting in a rented apartment, ripe for the taking. I thanked the building manager for his discretion, instructed him to flag my father's phone number, and ended the call. I leaned back in my leather chair. The realization hit me with the force of a freight train. They were never going to stop. As long as they believed I was beneath them, they would continuously try to sabotage my life to benefit Brandon. The boundaries I had set by blocking their numbers and ignoring their tantrums were vastly insufficient. They viewed my silence as weakness. They viewed my distance as an opportunity to strike. I realized that ignoring them would not protect me from their criminal entitlement. It was time to stop playing games. It was time to crush their delusions permanently. I looked at Elijah. His eyes were dark, reflecting the same calculated ruthlessness that I felt. This crosses the line from toxic family dynamics into actionable criminal harassment. Elijah stated, his lawyer instincts kicking into high gear. We can file an injunction draft, a cease and desist, or press formal charges for attempted fraud. I shook my head slowly. No, I replied, my voice steady and icy. A legal document is just a piece of paper to a man like Thomas. He will rationalize it, twist it, and play the victim. I want to publicly, psychologically, and utterly dismantle the false reality this entire family lives in. I want them to see exactly who they are dealing with. I explained my plan to Elijah, mapping out a scenario where their staggering arrogance would reach its absolute peak right before I dropped the hammer. I needed them in a controlled environment, surrounded by the very wealth they coveted, completely unaware that they were walking into a trap of their own making. I needed an audience consisting only of the four of them. I instructed Elijah to pull the files for one of the most stunning properties currently sitting in the Apex Holdings portfolio. It was a sprawling gated lakefront estate located in the wealthy northern suburbs, a property I had recently acquired, fully furnished and prepped for a corporate lease. It was the perfect stage for the final act. I called my executive assistant and ordered her to contact a courier service. We drafted a formal gold-embossed invitation printed on cardstock. The wording was deliberately crafted to stroke their massive egos and bait their endless greed. The invitation cordially requested the presence of Thomas, Cynthia, Brandon, and Jasmine at a family reconciliation dinner. The stated purpose of the dinner was to discuss my current living situation, my financial future, and a potential realignment of family assets. It was precisely the kind of submissive, defeated language my parents expected from a daughter they believed they had just successfully cornered. The courier was instructed to hand-deliver one invitation to my parents' suburban house and a second invitation directly to the industrial apartment where Brandon and Jasmine were currently suffocating under their lease. I knew exactly how they would interpret the invitation. They would read the words and assume I had discovered my father's phone call to the building management. They would assume I was terrified, broken, and waving a white flag of surrender. They would walk into that dinner fully expecting me to hand over the keys to the downtown high-rise and beg for their forgiveness. I spent the rest of the afternoon finalizing the operational details of the dinner. I hired a private catering team to prepare an extravagant meal, ensuring the atmosphere would reek of the kind of wealth Jasmine desperately tried to project on her fake social media accounts. I arranged for a discreet private security detail to be present on the property, stationed out of sight, but ready to intervene the moment the situation inevitably escalated. Elijah agreed to attend the dinner as well, bringing his heavy leather briefcase filled with the undisputed, legally binding truth of my empire. I sat in the quiet luxury of my penthouse, looking out over the city as the sun began to set over Lake Michigan. The trap was perfectly set. The bait had been cast. Now I only had to wait for the rats to bite. I did not have to wait very long. The courier service sent a notification confirming that both envelopes had been successfully delivered and signed for. My phone, which I had temporarily unblocked, remained silent for exactly 1 hour. I imagined the victorious phone calls happening between my parents and Brandon. I imagined Jasmine picking out her most expensive outfit, preparing to gloat over my supposed downfall. The screen of my phone suddenly lit up, vibrating against the polished wood of my desk. A message had just arrived from Brandon. I picked up the device, my expression blank, and opened the message. The arrogance radiating from it was palpable, a reflection of a man who firmly believed he had already won the war. He was stepping right into the jaws of the trap, totally blinded by his own entitlement. The text message read exactly as I knew it would. "We are coming tonight, and you better have all your bags packed because Dad fixed your lease for us. We are taking your apartment." I read the toxic words twice, letting the sheer, unadulterated delusion of his threat fully wash over me. I locked the screen of my phone, placed it back on the desk, and allowed a genuine predatory smile to finally break across my face. They were coming for my apartment. They were coming to take everything they thought I had. They had absolutely no idea what was actually waiting for them at the lake. The evening arrived with a chilling breeze rolling off the dark waters of Lake Michigan. I stood in the grand foyer of the massive lakefront estate I had officially acquired just 3 short months prior. It was a sprawling masterpiece secluded perfectly behind massive iron security gates. I purchased this property for corporate leases, but tonight it served as the ultimate theater for my family's overdue reckoning. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I watched my father's sedan pull up to the security gate. I had explicitly instructed the guards to let them through without a word of confirmation. The heavy black gate slowly swung open, allowing their car to creep down the driveway lined with manicured oak trees. They finally parked their car near the grand front entrance. I watched the 4 of them step out of the vehicle. Brandon puffed out his chest, looking around at the multi-million-dollar property with a smug, entitled grin. Jasmine stepped out next, her sharp heels clicking aggressively against the paving stones. She looked around the sweeping estate, her eyes narrowing with instant jealousy. I could see her mouth moving rapidly as she leaned in to whisper something to my mother. As they approached the double doors, my private security detail stepped forward to open them. Thomas and Cynthia walked into the grand foyer, their eyes darting around the vaulted ceilings, the floating glass staircase, and the museum-quality art adorning the walls. They were desperately trying to mask their awe with disdain. Jasmine scoffed loudly, the harsh sound echoing off the marble floors. She definitely borrowed her boss's house just to show off. Jasmine whispered loudly to Cynthia, making sure her voice carried down the quiet hallway. "There is no way a lowly bean counter rents a place like this. She is probably house-sitting for a partner at her accounting firm while they are out of town. It is pathetic how hard she is trying to impress us." Cynthia nodded in immediate agreement, her lips pursed in extreme disapproval. "You know exactly how she is," Cynthia replied, her voice dripping with toxic maternal contempt. "Always trying to overcompensate because she knows she will never have a real family or a real life like you and Brandon. We will just play along with her little charade until we get what we came for tonight." I waited for them in the formal dining room. The beautiful space was illuminated by a breathtaking crystal chandelier suspended directly over a massive mahogany dining table. I had hired a private culinary team, and the air was rich with the scent of seared prime rib and expensive herbs. I sat at the head of the table wearing a perfectly tailored emerald green dress, my posture relaxed and composed. Elijah sat quietly in the far corner of the room, positioned slightly in the shadows. He had a thick leather briefcase resting on the table in front of him, his hands folded over the polished surface. He looked like an apex predator waiting for a signal. My family walked into the dining room moving as a united toxic front. They did not greet me. They did not offer a word of thanks for the extravagant meal waiting for them. Thomas took the seat at the opposite end of the table, attempting to establish physical dominance. Brandon and Jasmine sat to his right, while Cynthia sat to his left. They looked at me with expressions of supreme, unearned victory. They truly believed they had me completely backed into a corner. The private catering staff moved silently into the room, serving the first course. I instructed the sommelier to pour an exceptionally expensive vintage of Cabernet Sauvignon into their crystal glasses. Brandon picked up his glass, took a large gulp, and smirked at me across the mahogany table. "You really went all out for your apology dinner, Olivia," Brandon said, his voice loud and obnoxious. "I have to admit, borrowing your boss's mansion for the night was a nice touch. But let us skip the fake pleasantries. We all know exactly why you called us here. You got caught, and now it is time to face the music." I did not respond immediately. I slowly picked up my own wine glass, taking a slow, deliberate sip. I let the heavy silence stretch out, forcing them to sit in the uncomfortable tension. Thomas slammed his hand flat against the table, violently rattling the expensive silver cutlery. "Wipe that arrogant look off your face right now!" Thomas barked, his face flushing a deep red. "You have been caught in a massive lie, Olivia. I know exactly what you have been doing. You have been hoarding your money, pretending to be some high-rolling corporate executive, renting a luxury penthouse downtown, while your brother and his wife are suffering in a miserable industrial box. It is completely unnatural, and it ends tonight." I set my glass down, keeping my movements perfectly slow and fluid. "What exactly ends tonight, Thomas?" As I asked, my voice carrying a cool, detached curiosity. Brandon violently slammed his fist on the table, desperate to be the center of attention. He pointed an aggressive finger directly at my face. "Your selfish little game ends tonight," he shouted, his eyes wide with manic entitlement. "I want the keys to the downtown penthouse right now. Give them to me." Dad already called the management office. He spoke to them directly. "We know you are having a mental breakdown, and the building manager is transferring your lease directly into my name. You are being kicked out, Olivia. It is already done." Jasmine smiled, a vicious, triumphant expression crossing her face. She adjusted her designer watch and leaned forward, resting her elbows on the mahogany table. "You should be thanking us, Olivia. We are taking a massive financial burden off your hands. You clearly cannot handle the pressure of living in a place like that anyway. You need to pack your things tonight. We are moving into the high-rise tomorrow morning." Cynthia chimed in, adopting her tone of fake maternal concern. "We are doing this for your own good," she insisted, looking at me as if I were a deeply disturbed child. "You belong in a quiet, modest apartment somewhere safe. Brandon is the man of the family. He needs a luxury unit to build his career. He and Jasmine need a proper home to recover from the awful financial abuse they suffered from the bank. It is your duty as a daughter to step aside and let your brother take what he needs. It is the natural order." I looked at the four of them. They had constructed an entire alternate reality in their minds. They genuinely believed that Thomas had successfully orchestrated a hostile takeover of my downtown penthouse simply by making a single fraudulent phone call. The sheer magnitude of their financial illiteracy was almost breathtaking. They had absolutely no concept of property deeds, corporate ownership, or legally binding equity. They operated purely on toxic entitlement and profound delusion. "I want the keys right now," Brandon demanded again, his voice echoing off the high vaulted ceilings. He stood up from his chair, trying to physically intimidate me across the length of the dining table. "Stop stalling and hand them over." I kept my hands resting lightly on the table. "You honestly believe you can just claim my residence with a phone call?" I asked, my tone perfectly even. "You believe you can just demand the keys to my life, and I will blindly hand them over?" Thomas scoffed loudly, crossing his arms over his chest. "You have no choice, Olivia. The building management knows you are unstable. They know I am your financial guarantor. The lease is being transferred. You have lost. Now do the right thing for once in your miserable life and hand your brother the keys." Brandon sneered, his face twisting into an ugly mask of pure contempt. "Stop pretending you are rich, Olivia." He spat out the words, dripping with decades of unchecked jealousy. "We all know you are just a glorified bean counter. Where is your actual trashy rental? Just give me the keys to the high-rise and I will personally move your garbage to whatever slum you actually belong in. You are nothing but a pathetic spinster trying to play dress-up. It is time for you to go back to the bottom where you belong." The silence in the dining room became absolute. The only sound was the faint crashing of the dark lake waves against the shoreline outside the massive glass windows. Elijah sat perfectly still in the corner, his eyes locked on me, waiting for the precise moment I had orchestrated. I did not raise my voice. I did not show a single ounce of anger, sadness, or fear. I calmly wiped my mouth. "My house?" I asked him, taking a slow, steady sip of Cabernet. "Which one, Brandon?" Brandon completely froze. His hand, which had been reaching for his wineglass, stopped in midair. The arrogant sneer on his face faltered, replaced by a flicker of genuine confusion. He glanced at Thomas, who was squinting at me from the opposite end of the mahogany table, trying to decipher if my question was some sort of desperate last-minute bluff. Cynthia let out a sharp, irritated breath, crossing her arms over her chest. Stop playing word games, my mother snapped. You know exactly which house we are talking about. The luxury apartment downtown. The one you have been wasting your money on to pretend you are something you are not. Give your brother the keys right now. I calmly set my crystal wine glass down on the table. I raised my right hand and snapped my fingers once, a sharp, echoing sound. Elijah stood. He walked forward carrying the heavy leather folder. He placed the folder in front of me, his expression blank. My family watched him with unease. They had no idea he was a ruthless attorney. I opened the folder. I slid the first document across the smooth surface of the table until it rested directly in front of Brandon. Are you talking about the penthouse? I asked. I do not rent it. I own it. I own the entire top floor. There is no lease for Dad to transfer. Brandon stared at the deed. He recognized the address. He recognized my name printed as the sole proprietor. His jaw went completely slack. Thomas leaned forward. He snatched the paper from his son and read it for himself. This is a fake, Thomas sputtered. A forged document. A lowly accountant cannot afford a penthouse. You are lying. I smiled coldly. I am an auditor, and I built an empire while you bailed your son out. Let us move on. I reached into the leather folder and pulled out the second stack of documents. I tossed them onto the table. The thud made Jasmine jump. Or maybe you mean the Oakbrook house, I suggested, watching the blood drain completely from my parents' faces. The beautiful four-bedroom suburban estate that Mom and Dad wasted $140,000 of their retirement savings on. The house Brandon lost because he could not manage his own finances. Brandon was hyperventilating now. His hands gripped the edge of the table tightly. How do you know about the Oakbrook house? He whispered, his voice cracking with genuine fear. I bought it, I replied smoothly. When the bank foreclosed on you because of your massive financial incompetence, they put it up for county auction. My company purchased it with a cash bid. I spent 4 months gutting the property. You and Jasmine lived like animals, ruining the floors. I fixed your mistakes. I renovated the entire property to modern luxury standards, flipped it, and sold it to a cardiovascular surgeon last month for a $500,000 profit. Cynthia let out a strangled, high-pitched gasp. She pressed both hands to her chest, her eyes wide with absolute horror. You bought your brother's house? She choked out, her perfectly curated suburban facade shattering into a million pieces. You profited off his tragedy. You stole our investment. We gave him that down payment. That was our retirement money, Olivia. You stole our money. I stole nothing. Cynthia, I corrected her. The bank took your money because your son defaulted on his mortgage. I simply bought a distressed asset on the open market and turned it into pure capital. I took the very house you used to mock my single status, and I used it to multiply my own net worth. I want to personally thank you, Mom. Your terrible financial decision-making funded my latest acquisition. Jasmine was shaking. Her dark skin went ashen. The luxury lifestyle influencer persona she clung to was evaporating in real time. She looked at me, then at Brandon, realizing the magnitude of the wealth she was sitting across from wealth she had spent 5 years insulting. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. I was not finished. I reached into the folder again. It was bound in a thick blue legal backing. I slid it deliberately across the mahogany table until it touched Jasmine's manicured hand. Or maybe I said, leaning forward so they could hear. Maybe you mean the miserable, depressing industrial dump you two are currently living in. Brandon stared at this document. It was a copy of the residential lease agreement he had signed 6 months ago when he was desperate to escape homelessness. He recognized his own frantic signature at the bottom of the page. He looked at the corporate logo printed at the top of the contract. Apex Rentals. Surprise, Brandon, I said, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings of the mansion. Apex Holdings is my company. I am the sole founder. I am your landlord. You have been paying my mortgage for 6 months. Every single exorbitant late fee, every single draconian penalty you paid went directly into my personal corporate accounts. You thought you were outsmarting the system. You thought you found a desperate lifeline. I was the one holding the leash the entire time. The psychological destruction of my family was absolute. It was a masterpiece of total devastation. For 10 full seconds, nobody in the dining room moved. They sat frozen in their chairs, trapped in a nightmare they could not wake up from. The reality of their situation crashed down on them with the weight of a collapsing building. The daughter they had deemed a worthless spinster, the woman they had told to go rent a cheap apartment, was actually a multimillionaire real estate magnate who currently owned the very roof over the golden child's head. Jasmine began to weep. It was not her usual theatrical, manipulative crying. It was the raw, guttural sobbing of a woman who realized she was entirely at the mercy of the person she had relentlessly bullied. She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking violently. Brandon looked like he was going to vomit. His chest heaved as he struggled to pull air into his lungs. The illusion of his superiority, the lie that he was the successful patriarch of the family, had been brutally and surgically removed. He was nothing but a broke, desperate tenant, renting a slum from his younger sister. But the shock did not last long for Thomas. My father had spent his entire life dominating others, demanding submission, and controlling the financial narrative of our family. His mind simply could not process the fact that he had been completely outplayed by a woman. The devastating truth bypassed his logic and mutated directly into explosive, unhinged rage. Thomas kicked his chair back so violently, it crashed into the wall behind him. He stood up, his face a terrifying shade of crimson, the veins bulging in his neck. He slammed both of his fists down on the mahogany table, sending the crystal wine glasses toppling over. Dark red wine spilled across the pristine white tablecloth, looking like fresh blood. "You deceitful, ungrateful little wretch!" Thomas roared, his voice cracking with pure, unadulterated fury. "You sit there and smile while your own blood suffers. You deliberately hoarded this wealth. You manipulated the market to steal your brother's home. You tricked him into signing a lease to humiliate him. You owe this family everything you have." Thomas pointed a trembling, aggressive finger directly at my face. "You are going to sign those properties over to us right now." He commanded, his entitlement blinding him to the reality of the legal documents sitting on the table. "You are going to transfer the deed to that downtown penthouse to Brandon. You are going to reimburse your mother and me the $140,000 you stole from our retirement. You are going to surrender every single asset in that company portfolio to me, and I will distribute it as I see fit. You have no right to this money. It belongs to the family." I sat perfectly still, watching my father lose his grip on reality. His demands were so far removed from legal logic, they bordered on clinical insanity. He genuinely believed that his authority as a father superseded corporate law, property deeds, and basic human decency. He believed he could just scream loud enough and my empire would magically belong to him. I looked at Elijah, who was already reaching into his briefcase for the final lethal piece of paperwork. The trap had been sprung, the truth had been revealed, and now it was time to execute the final penalty. I took another slow, deliberate sip of my red wine, enjoying the taste of complete victory. My toxic family was finally paying the ultimate price. They genuinely thought they could just control me forever, but they were entirely and completely wrong. The dining room erupted into absolute pandemonium the moment my father finished his delusional rant. Cynthia jumped up from her chair, her face contorted into a mask of pure hatred. She pointed a shaking finger at me across the table. "You are a monster," she screamed, her voice cracking. "How could you do this to your own flesh and blood? We raised you. We gave you everything, and this is how you repay us. You tricked your brother into signing a lease to humiliate him. You stole his house out from under him. You are going to sign the deed to this lakefront mansion over to Brandon right now as repayment for your deceit. It is the only way to make this right." I looked at my mother, completely unfazed. "I stole nothing, Mom," I replied, my voice steady. "I purchased a foreclosed asset at a public auction. Brandon lost his house because he chose to stop paying his mortgage to fund a lifestyle he could not afford. And as for this estate, it belongs to my corporate portfolio. I will not be handing over a multi-million-dollar property to compensate for your poor parenting." Thomas slammed his fist on the table again, his face turning an even deeper shade of crimson. "You will do exactly as your mother says," he bellowed. "You have hoarded this wealth while your family suffered. You are going to transfer every single asset you own to me. I am the head of this family, and I will not allow a disrespectful, arrogant daughter to dictate the financial terms of our lives." Jasmine could no longer contain her rage. Her luxury influencer persona vanished, replaced by a desperate, violent fury. She grabbed her crystal wine glass and hurled it across the table. It smashed against the wall behind me, shattering into pieces and leaving a dark stain on the wallpaper. "I am going to rip that smile right off your face," Jasmine shrieked, kicking her chair backward. She lunged forward, trying to climb over the catered dinner to reach me. "You think you are smart. You think you can ruin my life and get away with it. I am going to destroy you." I did not flinch. I did not move from my seat. I simply raised my right hand and snapped my fingers. The heavy oak doors of the adjoining library swung open instantly. Elijah stepped out into the dining room, his expression cold and professional. Right behind him were two massive private security guards dressed in black suits. They moved with terrifying speed and precision. Before Jasmine could even get one knee onto the dining table, the guards intercepted her. They grabbed her arms firmly, pulling her back and forcing her to stand down. Jasmine thrashed against their grip, screaming obscenities, but the guards held her effortlessly. Thomas and Cynthia froze in absolute shock. They had no idea there was armed security waiting just a few feet away. Brandon stumbled backward, his false bravado completely evaporating at the sight of the security personnel. Elijah walked over to my side of the table. He did not say a word to my family. He simply opened his briefcase and pulled out one final devastating piece of paperwork. He placed it gently on the table right next to my wine glass. I picked up the document and held it up so Brandon could see the bold black letters printed across the top. The room fell dead silent again, save for the heavy breathing of my panicked brother. "I have one last gift for you tonight, Brandon," I said, my voice echoing clearly through the massive room. "You see, being your landlord has been a very enlightening experience. It has given me a front row seat to your absolute financial incompetence. According to the lease agreement you eagerly signed with Apex Rentals, rent is due on the 1st of every month. It is currently the second week of the month. You and Jasmine are exactly 2 months behind on your rent payments." Brandon's eyes widened in sheer terror. He knew I was right. He stopped paying the exorbitant rent weeks ago, assuming the faceless corporate management company would take months to process late notices. He assumed he could game the system just like he had with his mortgage. "You thought you could just dodge my property managers," I continued, leaning forward. "You thought you could ignore the late fee notices and continue living in my building for free. But I do not operate like a slow-moving bank. I operate with ruthless efficiency." I tossed the document across the table. It landed perfectly on top of his original lease agreement. "This is a formal 3-day pay or quit eviction notice," I announced. "My legal team filed it with the city court this morning. The legal eviction process has officially started. You have exactly 3 days to pay the thousands of dollars you owe me in back rent and accumulated late penalties. If that money is not in my corporate account by Friday afternoon, the county sheriff will arrive at your door to physically remove you and all of your belongings from my property." Cynthia let out an agonizing wail. She clutched her chest, looking as if she might collapse. "You are making your brother homeless," she cried, tears streaming down her face. "How can you be so evil? You have millions of dollars and you are throwing him out on the street over a few missed rent payments." "I am not making him homeless," I replied coldly. "His own choices made him homeless. I am simply holding a delinquent tenant accountable to a legally binding contract. He wanted to be treated like the man of the house. This is how the real world treats men who do not pay their bills." Thomas pointed a shaking finger at me, his eyes filled with defeated rage. "This is not over, Olivia," he snarled. "You cannot just discard your family like this. I will hire the best lawyers in this city. I will drag you through court until you have nothing left. I will take every single building you own." I smiled at my father, a genuine expression of absolute amusement. "You do not have a dime to your name, Thomas. You drained your retirement to fund your son's failures. You cannot afford a consultation with a decent lawyer, let alone a protracted legal battle against a corporate entity holding millions in liquid capital. You have absolutely no power here." I turned to the security guards. "Escort these people off my property immediately," I ordered. "If they resist, call the local police and press charges for trespassing and property damage." The guards moved in with synchronized precision. They grabbed Brandon and Thomas by their arms, forcefully steering them toward the grand foyer. The second guard kept a firm hold on Jasmine, who was still weeping hysterically. Cynthia followed behind them, stumbling over her own feet as the reality of their total defeat finally set in. They were shoved out the front doors and down the sweeping stone steps of the estate. The weather had turned violent while we were inside. A freezing torrential downpour was hammering the Chicago suburbs. The heavy rain soaked through their clothes, instantly ruining Jasmine's expensive designer outfit and pasting Cynthia's hair to her face. I stood in the doorway, protected by the massive overhang of the porch, and watched them struggle toward their cheap sedan. The security guards stood on either side of the driveway, making sure they did not try to turn back. Thomas stopped halfway to the car. The freezing rain was coming down in sheets, washing away whatever tiny shred of dignity he had left. He turned around to face me, looking up at the illuminated mansion. He was completely drenched, standing in the dark, looking small and utterly pathetic. He raised his fists into the air, screaming over the sound of the torrential downpour. "I will sue you," he roared, his voice cracking with desperation and fury. "I will sue you for everything you have. I will take this house. I will take your company. You are going to pay for what you have done to us today. I am your father and I will destroy you." I stood in the warm, dry entryway of my multi-million-dollar estate. I looked down at the people who had spent my entire life telling me I was worthless. They were currently standing in the freezing rain, completely broke, facing immediate eviction, and screaming empty threats into the wind. I did not say another word. I simply stepped back inside, reached out and pulled the heavy double doors shut. The satisfying click of the deadbolt locking echoed through the foyer. I turned around and walked back toward the dining room, leaving them entirely in the dark. I knew this was the absolute end of their toxic control. My mind was finally at peace. The morning after my family was escorted off my lakefront property, the retaliation began. I sat in my downtown penthouse, sipping my black coffee and reviewing my corporate emails. I fully expected Brandon to spend the weekend frantically packing his belongings to avoid the sheriff arriving at his door. Instead, my brother and his wife decided to launch a full-scale public attack against my company, Jasmine, who had spent the last 5 years desperately trying to build a career as a luxury lifestyle influencer, decided to leverage her social media following. She had always curated an online persona of immense wealth and high-end fashion. Now facing imminent homelessness, she pivoted her entire brand overnight. She transformed herself from a wealthy socialite into a persecuted victim. My executive assistant flagged the situation immediately. She sent me a link to a video Jasmine had just posted online. I clicked the link and watched my sister-in-law deliver a highly orchestrated theatrical performance. Jasmine was sitting against the blank white wall of the miserable apartment they were currently renting from me. She had intentionally removed her expensive makeup and wore a plain, oversized sweater to look as fragile and sympathetic as possible. She stared directly into the camera, squeezing out fake tears, and began spinning a vicious web of lies. In the video, Jasmine claimed that she and Brandon were the victims of a predatory, ruthless corporate slumlord. She specifically named Apex Holdings. She accused my company of targeting vulnerable families and engaging in highly illegal discriminatory practices. Jasmine heavily weaponized her race in the video. She falsely claimed that Apex Holdings deliberately forced minority tenants into unlivable conditions, ignored severe maintenance requests, and illegally evicted families without any due process. She urged her followers to go to my business pages and destroy our online reputation. Within hours, the smear campaign was gaining massive traction. Her loyal followers blindly believed her fabricated story. They flooded the Apex Holdings business profiles with hundreds of fake one-star reviews. Jasmine was actively trying to destroy the commercial reputation I had spent 5 years meticulously building. She thought that generating enough negative public relations would force me to panic, apologize, and cancel the eviction notice to save my brand. While Jasmine was staging her digital war, my father decided to make good on his screaming threats from the driveway. Later that same afternoon, a process server arrived at the lobby of my high-rise building. He handed the concierge a thick manila envelope addressed directly to me. I actually laughed out loud at it. Thomas had managed to find a shady, desperate attorney willing to take his case on contingency. My father had officially filed a civil lawsuit against me in the county court. The primary charge listed on the front page was elder financial abuse. Thomas had completely fabricated a financial narrative to try and steal my wealth. In the lawsuit, he claimed that the $140,000 he had given Brandon 5 years ago was never a gift. I was now legally claiming that the money was a high-interest personal loan that Brandon was supposed to pay back in full. Thomas claimed that because my company Apex Holdings had purchased Brandon's foreclosed house at the county auction, I had somehow legally absorbed Brandon's personal debt. He was arguing to a judge that by buying the property, I had assumed financial responsibility for the supposed loan Brandon owed my parents. Therefore, Thomas was demanding that the court freeze all of my corporate assets and force me to pay him $500,000 in financial damages and accrued interest. It was a completely frivolous, legally illiterate lawsuit. Any first-year law student would know that when a property is foreclosed on by a primary lender and sold at a public tax auction, all secondary personal liens are entirely wiped out. The buyer purchases the property with a clean, unburdened title. I had absolutely no legal connection to whatever private financial arrangements my father had made with his golden son. But Thomas did not care about the actual law. I was using the lawsuit as an intimidation tactic. He believed that the combination of Jasmine's public smear campaign and the threat of a prolonged legal battle would terrify me into writing them a massive settlement check just to make them go away permanently. I did not panic. I did not call them to negotiate. I simply picked up my phone and called my real estate attorney, Elijah. I forwarded Elijah the link to Jasmine's defamatory video and handed him the physical copy of my father's lawsuit when he arrived at my office. Elijah read through the legal filing, his dark eyes scanning the pages with clinical precision. When he finished reading the ridiculous claims, a sharp, dangerous smile spread across his handsome face. "Your father just made a catastrophic error," Elijah stated, tossing the lawsuit onto my desk with a satisfying thud. "He is trying to use the legal system as a weapon to extort you, but he clearly has no idea how mortgage underwriting actually works. If he wants to officially enter the $140,000 into public court records as a formalized loan, we are going to look into exactly how he documented that transaction 5 years ago." I leaned forward in my chair, folding my hands together tightly on the desk. "What exactly are we looking for?" I asked, my curiosity fully piqued. Elijah opened his laptop and securely logged into the county property records database. When Brandon bought that house in Oak Brook 5 years ago, he had to secure a primary mortgage from a major bank. Elijah explained, his fingers flying rapidly across the keyboard. Banks have incredibly strict federal regulations regarding down payments. If a homebuyer receives a large sum of money from a family member to use as a down payment, the bank requires extensive, certified proof of exactly where that money came from to prevent fraud. Elijah continued his explanation as he pulled up the historical deeds and mortgage filings associated with the Oak Brook property. The bank needs to know if the money is a gift or a loan. If it is a loan, the bank has to factor that monthly repayment into the buyer's debt-to-income ratio. Given Brandon's spotty employment history and Jasmine's massive credit card debt, there is absolutely no way the primary bank would have approved their mortgage if they knew they also had to pay back a $140,000 loan to your father. I understood immediately. So how did they get the mortgage approved? I asked, the pieces of the puzzle rapidly coming together in my mind as I realized the magnitude of their lies. "That is exactly what we are going to find out," Elijah replied confidently. "I am going to pull the original underwriting documents from the primary lender. Since your company legally purchased the distressed asset from the bank, I have the full authorization to request the historical chain of title and the original loan origination files. We are going to dig all the way down to the absolute bedrock of this transaction and expose whatever they hid from the underwriters." I authorized Elijah to dedicate his entire firm to the investigation. I wanted every single piece of paper associated with my brother's original home purchase scrutinized. While Jasmine continued to post crying videos online, and my father bragged to his friends about his impending lawsuit, I went about my normal business day. I approved new tenant applications, reviewed architectural plans for my next commercial renovation, and enjoyed a quiet, expensive dinner at my favorite downtown restaurant. I felt absolutely no stress. I knew I had a relentless predator working on my behalf. That night, I went to sleep perfectly relaxed in my luxury penthouse, listening to the ambient sounds of the bustling city below. I slept deeply, knowing my empire was entirely secure. My phone was resting on my nightstand, set to its highest volume setting, just in case my legal team needed to reach me for an urgent update. The loud, sudden ringing shattered the silence of my bedroom at exactly midnight. I sat up quickly, brushing the sleep from my eyes, and grabbed the phone. The caller ID showed it was Elijah. I answered the call immediately, knowing my attorney would never disturb me at this late hour unless he had discovered something truly monumental regarding my family. Olivia, Elijah said, his deep voice crackling with intense, restrained energy. I just finished combing through the original bank underwriting files for Brandon's Oakbrook mortgage. I finally found the financial origin documents regarding the $140,000 your parents gave him. What did you find? I asked, reaching over to turn on my bedside lamp and sitting up completely straight in my bed. Elijah let out a low, victorious laugh that sent a thrill of anticipation down my spine. He found a massive, glaring illegality resting right at the center of the paperwork. Your father and your brother did not just make a minor financial mistake, Elijah declared, the absolute certainty ringing clearly through his voice over the line. They committed a massive federal crime. And this desperate, pathetic lawsuit your father just filed against you is the exact piece of evidence we need to blow this entire family to pieces. I gripped my phone tighter, my heart pounding with a mixture of shock and exhilaration. Explain it to me, I demanded, my voice barely above a whisper. I need to understand exactly what you are looking at right now. Elijah immediately let out a sharp breath. The law surrounding real estate financing is incredibly strict, especially after the housing market crash years ago. He explained, his tone shifting into full legal mode. When a person applies for a residential mortgage, the bank requires absolute transparency regarding their financial situation. The underwriter needs to ensure the buyer can actually afford the monthly payments. When your brother applied for the mortgage on that Oakbrook house, his debt-to-income ratio was already terrible because of Jasmine's extreme credit card usage. There is absolutely no way he could have secured that loan on his own merit. I nodded, even though Elijah could not see me in the dark bedroom. That is why my parents gave him the $140,000, I said softly. Exactly, Elijah continued. But banks do not just let massive amounts of cash magically appear in an applicant's bank account without asking intense questions. The underwriter required certified proof of where that money came from. When a family member provides money for a down payment, federal banking regulations require them to sign a specific legal document called a gift letter. This document is a legally binding affidavit. By signing it, your parents swore under penalty of perjury that the $140,000 was a pure, unattached gift. They had to explicitly state in writing that no repayment was expected, required, or implied. My eyes widened as the sheer magnitude of my father's stupidity finally clicked into place. So if they signed a federal document swearing it was a gift, I started. Then filing a civil lawsuit in a county court claiming it was actually a loan is a direct admission of federal bank fraud. Elijah finished for me, his voice ringing with absolute triumph. By trying to sue you and extort your company, your father just put it on the public record that he and Brandon lied to a federally insured financial institution. They committed mortgage fraud and wire fraud to secure that house. They deliberately deceived the bank. What is the penalty for that? I asked, feeling a cold, predatory thrill wash over my entire body. Elijah did not hesitate. Up to 30 years in federal prison and up to $1 million in fines for each offense. Your father just handed us the exact weapon we need to completely annihilate them. He was so desperate to steal your wealth that he essentially signed his own arrest warrant. I sat in my bed for a long moment, letting the silence stretch between us. The family that had spent my entire life calling me worthless The father who had told me to go rent a cheap apartment and the brother who had squandered every opportunity he was ever given were now staring down the barrel of a federal indictment. And I was the one holding the trigger. Do not file a motion to dismiss the lawsuit. I told Elijah, a brilliant, devastating plan rapidly forming in my mind. We are going to lean into this. I want you to call Thomas's attorney tomorrow morning. I want you to sound completely panicked. Tell him I am terrified of the bad press Jasmine is generating online. Tell him I am deeply intimidated by the elder abuse lawsuit. Beg him for a private settlement meeting. Elijah laughed, a rich, dark sound that perfectly matched my own mood. You want to lure them into a false sense of absolute victory. I want them to feel like untouchable kings right before the floor drops out from under them, I confirmed. Schedule the deposition and settlement meeting at your downtown law office. Make sure they know I will be attending personally. They will assume I am coming to hand over a massive check and the deeds to my properties just to make this all go away. I will set the trap first thing in the morning, Elijah promised before ending the call. Over the next few days, I watched my family take the bait with spectacular, arrogant ease. Elijah executed his role flawlessly. He contacted my father's shady attorney and projected an aura of complete corporate desperation. He claimed that Apex Holdings was taking a massive public relations hit due to Jasmine's relentless social media campaign. He insisted that I was emotionally fragile and willing to do whatever it took to avoid a messy public court battle with my own parents. He played the part of a terrified corporate lawyer, trying to mitigate a disastrous scandal perfectly. My father swallowed the entire story without a single moment of hesitation. Thomas truly believed his intimidation tactics had finally worked. He thought he had successfully bullied his daughter into submission, just as he had done for my entire childhood. Jasmine, fueled by the illusion of victory, ramped up her defamatory videos. She posted daily updates from their miserable industrial apartment wearing her plain, oversized sweaters and crying to her followers about how justice was finally being served against the evil corporate slumlord who had wronged her innocent family. Her performance was sickeningly dramatic. Brandon, who was currently facing an active eviction notice from my property management team, strutted around the city like he had already won the lottery. He genuinely thought he was days away from securing the keys to my luxury downtown penthouse and receiving a massive cash settlement. They were entirely blinded by their own toxic entitlement. They never stopped to consider that my sudden surrender was completely out of character. The day of the settlement meeting arrived with crisp, clear Chicago weather. I spent the morning reviewing the final unassailable evidence Elijah had meticulously compiled. We had the original gift letter bearing the notarized signatures of Thomas and Cynthia. We had the official mortgage origination documents bearing Brandon's signature. And we had a certified copy of the absurd civil lawsuit Thomas had just filed, explicitly contradicting the federal documents. It was a completely airtight, inescapable legal guillotine. I placed the documents carefully into a thin manila envelope. Elijah's downtown law firm occupied the top 2 floors of a prestigious commercial high-rise. The offices featured polished marble floors, sleek glass walls, and a sweeping view of the city skyline. It was an environment designed to intimidate, but my family walked through the front doors completely oblivious to the danger. I sat in my private vehicle parked in the underground garage watching the live security feed from Elijah's lobby on my encrypted tablet. My family arrived looking like royalty holding court. Thomas led the pack wearing a sharply tailored suit he likely bought on credit just for this occasion. He walked with his chest puffed out, radiating an unearned sense of absolute authority. Cynthia walked closely beside him, her chin tilted upward, a smug, satisfied smile plastered across her face. Brandon swaggered into the lobby, his hands stuffed into his pockets, looking around the expensive law firm with extreme greed. He was already calculating how much of my wealth he was going to extract today. Jasmine brought up the rear. She had completely dropped the fragile, victimized persona she used for her social media videos. She was dressed impeccably in a fitted designer dress, her dark hair styled to perfection. She carried a luxury handbag and looked around the office with open disdain, clearly believing she was vastly superior to everyone in the room. They were escorted into the primary glass-walled conference room by a junior associate. Thomas's extremely sleazy, incredibly cheap discount attorney was already waiting for them at the massive oak table. Through the security feed, I watched them take their seats. They were laughing, joking, and leaning back in their plush leather chairs with total relaxation. Thomas slapped his attorney on the back, clearly congratulating him on a job well done. Jasmine pulled out her phone, likely checking her social media engagement, her face glowing with malicious triumph. They fully expected me to walk into that room, accompanied by a team of nervous accountants and defeated lawyers. They expected me to slide a check for $500,000 across the table, beg for their forgiveness, and hand over the keys to my entire real estate empire. They thought they had finally broken the quiet, responsible daughter they had spent a lifetime treating like absolute garbage. Their delusion was absolutely breathtaking to witness. I turned off the security feed on my tablet. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. My tailored black suit was immaculate. My expression was perfectly composed, devoid of any fear, anxiety, or hesitation. I took a deep, steadying breath, feeling the heavy, undeniable weight of ultimate power resting squarely on my shoulders. I was now the ultimate executioner. I stepped out of my vehicle and took the private executive elevator directly to the conference room floor. The hallway was completely silent. Elijah was waiting for me near the entrance of the conference room. He gave me a single sharp nod of confirmation. Everything was ready. The trap was securely locked. I did not bring a checkbook. I did not bring a single settlement document. I did not bring an apology. I carried absolutely nothing in my hands except for a single thin manila envelope. I walked forward, my heels clicking softly and rhythmically against the polished hardwood floor. I reached the heavy, imposing oak door of the corporate conference room. Through the glass panels, I could see my family sitting around the table, their faces flushed with arrogant victory. Brandon caught sight of me approaching. He nudged Thomas, and the entire family turned to watch me enter. Their smug, condescending smiles widened, anticipating my total surrender. I turned the brass handle and stepped into the conference room. I made direct, unflinching eye contact with my grinning brother, and then I looked at my father. I did not say a single word. I simply reached behind me, pushed the heavy oak door completely shut, and locked the deadbolt. The sharp click of the metal mechanism echoed loudly through the silent glass-walled room, signaling the beginning of their absolute destruction. The sharp click of the metal deadbolt echoing through the glass-walled conference room caused a brief flicker of confusion to pass across my father's face. Thomas quickly masked his hesitation with a loud, condescending scoff. He genuinely believed I locked the door to prevent his dramatic victory from being witnessed by the junior associates walking through the hallway outside. He thought I was deeply ashamed of my impending surrender. Thomas stood up from his plush leather chair, buttoning his cheap suit jacket with a theatrical display of unearned authority. He placed his hands flat on the polished oak table, leaning forward to project dominance over the room. "Well," Olivia Thomas began, his voice dripping with triumphant satisfaction, "I am glad to see you finally came to your senses. It took a lawsuit and a public relations nightmare, but you finally realized that you cannot outsmart your own family. We are ready to put this ugly business behind us, but it is going to cost you." I remained standing near the door, my expression completely blank. I did not speak. I simply watched him perform. Thomas took my silence as total submission. He puffed out his chest even further. "I have discussed the terms of your surrender with my attorney," he continued, gesturing to the sleazy discount lawyer sitting beside him. "We are demanding a cashier's check for $500,000 payable immediately. In exchange, I will drop the Elder financial abuse lawsuit. Furthermore, Jasmine has generously agreed to remove all of the negative reviews and videos she posted about your little real estate company. You will also sign a legally binding document stating you will never retaliate against Brandon. You pay us $500,000 right now and we all walk away." Brandon smirked confidently, leaning back in his chair and crossing his arms behind his head. Jasmine adjusted her expensive handbag, her dark eyes flashing with greedy anticipation. They were practically vibrating with excitement, waiting for me to pull a checkbook out of my tailored blazer. I did not reach for a checkbook. I walked slowly and deliberately toward the center of the oak table. I held up the single thin manila envelope I had carried into the room. I tossed it gently onto the table. It slid across the polished wood, stopping perfectly in front of Thomas' discount attorney. I smiled coldly. "I am not paying you a single dime, Thomas," I said, my voice eerily calm. "But I brought you some reading material. I suggest your lawyer open it." Thomas frowned, his arrogant facade slipping just a fraction. He nodded at his lawyer. The sleazy attorney picked up the envelope, his brow furrowing in confusion. He pulled back the metal clasp, opened the flap, and extracted the 3 crisp sheets of paper inside. The attorney adjusted his glasses and began to read the first page. I watched the color completely drain from the lawyer's face. It happened in an absolute instant. 1 second he was a smug, aggressive litigator expecting an easy payday, and the next second he looked like a man who had just stepped on a live landmine. His hands actually started to shake. The papers rattled loudly in the quiet conference room. "What is it?" Thomas demanded, growing impatient with his lawyer's sudden, terrifying silence. "Is it a counter-offer because I told you we are not negotiating? $500,000, or we take her to court." The lawyer did not answer Thomas. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with absolute, unadulterated panic and fear. He dropped the papers onto the table as if they were physically burning his hands. He pushed his leather chair backward, distancing himself from my father as quickly as humanly possible. Elijah, who had been standing silently near the window, finally stepped forward to take control of the execution. He walked over to the table and tapped a long, manicured finger against the documents the lawyer had just dropped. "Allow me to clarify the situation for you, Thomas," Elijah said, his deep voice carrying the lethal weight of a seasoned corporate predator, "since your discount legal counsel cannot suddenly speak. That first document is a certified copy of the gift letter you and Cynthia signed 5 years ago when Brandon bought his house. You swore under penalty of perjury that the $140,000 was a gift with absolutely no expectation of repayment." Elijah paused, letting the words hang heavily in the air. He then pointed to the second document. "That second piece of paper is the civil lawsuit you just filed against my client." Elijah continued, his tone turning razor sharp. "In that legal filing, you claim the exact same money was a high-interest personal loan. I am sure you can see the problem here, Thomas. You cannot have it both ways. When you sign a federal document claiming money is a gift to secure a mortgage and then sue someone claiming it was a loan, you have just committed a massive federal crime." Thomas' face went completely blank. He looked down at the papers, his mind struggling to process the dense legal terminology. "What are you talking about?" Thomas stammered, the aggressive volume entirely gone from his voice. "I am suing her for elder abuse. She stole our retirement money by buying that exact house." "You are openly confessing to bank fraud," Elijah corrected him brutally. "The third piece of paper in that stack outlines Title 18, United States Code Section 1344. Mortgage fraud and wire fraud against a federally insured financial institution. It carries a maximum penalty of up to 30 years in federal prison and a $1 million fine. By filing this ridiculous civil lawsuit, you just provided the federal government with a signed written confession of your own criminal activity." The silence that descended upon the conference room was suffocating. It was the sound of complete, irreversible legal destruction. Thomas stared at the federal statutes printed on the page. His arrogant posture collapsed. He looked like an old, terrified man. Brandon suddenly sat up straight, his chair squeaking loudly against the floor. The smug, entitled grin vanished from his face, replaced by raw, primal panic. He looked at Elijah, his chest heaving as his breathing grew rapid and shallow. "Wait," Brandon choked out, his voice cracking. "I just signed the mortgage papers. Dad gave me the money. I did not commit any fraud. I did not do anything wrong." Elijah turned his cold, predatory gaze onto my brother immediately. "You signed the final mortgage origination documents," Brandon Elijah stated firmly. "You presented the fraudulent gift letter to the underwriter to secure the loan. That makes you a co-conspirator in a federal felony. You are entirely culpable. You and your father are both facing federal indictments." Brandon began hyperventilating. The golden child, The man who had spent his entire life avoiding consequences and relying on parental bailouts was finally staring down a barrel he could not escape. There was no amount of crying or complaining that could save him from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He grabbed his chest, gasping for air, looking wildly around the room for an exit that did not exist. Elijah raised his left arm and pulled back the cuff of his expensive suit to check his watch. He looked back at Thomas and Brandon, his expression devoid of any mercy. "I am a very busy man," Elijah announced, his voice slicing through the frantic sounds of Brandon's hyperventilation. "You have exactly 60 seconds to instruct your attorney to drop this civil lawsuit with prejudice. If you do not officially withdraw the claim within the next 60 seconds, I will personally forward this entire manila envelope to the federal authorities and the primary mortgage lender. The countdown starts right now, 59 seconds. Thomas' discount attorney scrambled to his feet, practically clawing at his leather briefcase. "I am dropping the suit!" The lawyer shouted, his voice shaking with absolute terror. "I am withdrawing as counsel immediately because I want absolutely no part of this. I am filing the dismissal the second I get back to my office. You are completely on your own, Thomas." The lawyer bolted for the door. I stepped aside, unlocked the deadbolt, and let him flee the room. I closed the door and locked it again. 30 seconds, Elijah called out calmly, holding his wrist up. It was at that precise moment that Jasmine fully grasped the apocalyptic reality of the situation. She was legally married to a man who was moments away from a massive federal indictment. If the government pursued Brandon for mortgage fraud, they would seize every single asset they possessed. Her carefully curated luxury lifestyle influencer brand would be instantly annihilated by the resulting public scandal. Jasmine stood up so fast her chair tipped backward and crashed loudly against the floor. She turned her fierce, furious gaze directly onto Brandon. The reality of a federal indictment completely shattered whatever superficial loyalty she had left for him. Her meticulously crafted luxury lifestyle influencer persona evaporated, leaving behind a woman terrified of losing her own freedom. Brandon reached out to her, his hands shaking violently. "Jasmine, do not do this," Brandon begged, his voice cracking. "We have to stick together. We can figure this out." Jasmine slapped his hand away with absolute disgust. "Figure this out," she shrieked, her voice echoing off the glass walls of the conference room. "You just dragged me into a federal crime, Brandon. You lied to the bank, you lied to your sister, and you lied to me. I am not going to federal prison because you are a pathetic, financially illiterate failure." Brandon stumbled backward, looking as though he had been physically struck. Jasmine reached for her left hand. She grabbed her diamond engagement ring and the matching wedding band. With a swift, aggressive motion, she yanked the rings off her finger and threw them directly at Brandon's chest. The heavy diamonds bounced off his lapel and hit the polished hardwood floor, rolling away into the corners of the room. "I am filing for divorce this afternoon," Jasmine declared, her tone absolutely lethal. "I am calling my own lawyer the second I walk out of this building. And you want to know the best part, Brandon? I knew you were going broke 6 months ago. Every single time your parents gave you grocery money or you scraped together cash from selling your old watches, I took half of it. I have been secretly funneling whatever money we had left directly to my mother. I have a safety net, and you have absolutely nothing. You are facing an eviction and the Federal Bureau of Investigation entirely by yourself. I am completely done with you." Brandon fell back into his leather chair, clutching his chest as he hyperventilated. The golden child was watching his marriage dissolve in real time, completely powerless to stop it. As Jasmine's cruel revelation sank in, Cynthia suddenly began to gasp for air. My mother clutched her pearl necklace, her face turning an alarming shade of pale gray. The absolute destruction of her perfect family was happening right in front of her eyes. Cynthia realized that her golden boy was ruined. He was getting a divorce, he was getting evicted, and he was facing decades behind bars. Even worse, Cynthia realized that the $140,000 she and Thomas had pulled from their retirement savings was completely gone forever. It had been wasted on a fraudulent mortgage flipped by the daughter they hated and funneled away by a daughter-in-law who was currently fleeing the scene. Cynthia spun around and turned her wrath directly onto Thomas. "This is entirely your fault!" "Thomas," Cynthia screamed, her voice hitting a pitch so high it sounded like glass breaking. You are the one who told us to give him the retirement money. You are the one who told him to sign that fraudulent gift letter. You told me it was a brilliant investment. You ruined our lives. We have no savings left, and our son is going to jail because you are a stupid, arrogant old man. Thomas backed away from his wife, his face pale and sweating. Cynthia, I was trying to secure his future. Thomas stammered weakly, holding his hands up in defense. You were trying to show off. Cynthia roared, stepping toward him with her fists clenched. You wanted to prove you were the big patriarch. And now we have nothing. We are going to be living on Social Security because you had to stroke your own pathetic ego. You destroyed this family. The two of them began screaming at each other in the middle of the conference room, ignoring Brandon, who was weeping openly with his head resting on the mahogany table. The toxic united front they had maintained for my entire life was completely dissolving into chaotic, selfish finger-pointing. I watched my family tear each other apart with total detachment. I felt absolutely no pity for any of them. They were simply experiencing the natural consequences of their own malicious greed. While they screamed and cried, Elijah calmly opened his briefcase again. He pulled out 3 thick stacks of legal documents and placed them squarely on the table. The sharp sound of the heavy paper hitting the wood momentarily silenced my parents' argument. Elijah clicked a heavy silver pen and set it precisely next to the documents. Thomas Brandon. Elijah said, his voice cutting through their hysteria like a knife. You have exactly 30 seconds left to save yourselves from a federal indictment. Sign these documents right now, or I make the call to the authorities. Thomas and Brandon scrambled forward, their hands shaking so violently they could barely hold the pen. What are we signing? Thomas asked, his eyes darting frantically across the dense legal text. You are signing a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement, Elijah explained smoothly. You are signing a legally binding retraction of all the fake online reviews Jasmine posted about Apex Holdings. And most importantly, you are signing an absolute ironclad legal surrender of any and all financial claims against Olivia and her corporate entities. You will formally acknowledge that you have no rights to her assets, her properties, or her wealth. If you violate a single term of these agreements, the federal wire fraud evidence goes straight to the prosecutor. Sign the papers immediately. Thomas did not even bother to read the terms. Terrified of spending his twilight years in a federal penitentiary, he frantically scribbled his signature on every single signature line. He pushed the papers toward Brandon. Brandon, his face stained with tears and his breathing ragged, grabbed the silver pen and signed his name next to his father's. They completely surrendered every delusion of power they had ever held over me. They legally bound themselves to absolute silence. Elijah meticulously collected the signed documents, checking each signature for accuracy. He placed the papers back into his heavy leather briefcase and snapped the brass locks shut. The crisp sound signaled the absolute end of the legal war. Elijah looked at me and gave a single slow nod. We had won. The victory was total and undisputed. I turned my attention back to the pathetic remnants of my toxic family. My father was slumped over the table, looking completely defeated. My mother was standing near the wall, refusing to look at him while wiping away her bitter tears. Jasmine had already grabbed her designer coat and marched out of the conference room without looking back, abandoning Brandon to his miserable fate. You have 24 hours to vacate the industrial apartment. Brandon, I said, my voice perfectly flat and devoid of any emotion. I suggest you start packing your garbage immediately. If you are still on my property by tomorrow evening, the sheriff will physically remove you. I did not wait for a response. I turned my back on them, unlocked the heavy oak door, and walked out of the conference room. I left them sitting in the ruins of their own immense arrogance. I walked down the quiet hallway toward the private executive elevators, feeling an overwhelming sense of profound lightness. The heavy toxic chains that had weighed me down since childhood were finally permanently severed. I took the elevator down to the underground parking garage. The concrete structure was cool and dimly lit. My heels clicked rhythmically against the pavement as I approached my luxury car. I pulled my keys from my tailored blazer pocket, ready to drive back to my lakefront estate and enjoy the peace I had ruthlessly earned. But as I reached for the door handle, a sudden movement caught my eye. Someone stepped out from behind a concrete structural pillar. I paused, tightening my grip on my car keys. A figure emerged from the dark shadows of the parking garage, stepping into the dim fluorescent light. It was Cynthia. My mother had somehow slipped out of the conference room while I was waiting for the elevator and rushed down to the garage to intercept me. She was trembling visibly, her hair messy, and her face streaked with ruined makeup. She looked nothing like the proud, arrogant woman who had mocked my financial status at Thanksgiving 5 years ago. Cynthia stood shivering in the damp underground air, blocking my path to the driver's side door. She clasped her hands tightly together, staring at me with wide, desperate eyes. She had clearly bypassed Thomas and Brandon, leaving them upstairs to deal with their legal ruin. Cynthia had come down here alone, prepared to execute one final pathetic play to save herself from the destitution her husband caused. I stared back at her, completely unfazed. My mother fell to her knees on the cold, unforgiving concrete floor of the underground parking garage. The loud, hollow slap of her knees hitting the pavement echoed through the dimly lit structure. Cynthia did not care that the damp, oil-stained surface was completely ruining her expensive designer skirt. She did not care that she was physically abandoning the husband she had proudly stood beside for over 30 years. The terrifying, undeniable reality of true, inescapable poverty had finally broken through her lifelong delusion of superiority. The protective bubble of suburban wealth and arrogant entitlement had violently popped, leaving her utterly exposed to the harsh elements of the real world. Her hands, which were usually adorned with expensive jewelry, bought on credit, reached out and frantically grabbed the hem of my perfectly tailored wool coat. She clung to the fabric with a desperate white-knuckled grip, treating me like the absolute last life raft on a rapidly sinking ship. The woman who had spent my entire existence treating me like an embarrassing afterthought was now literally begging at my feet. "Olivia, please!" Cynthia sobbed, her voice echoing shrilly against the thick concrete pillars of the garage. "You have to help me. You have to let me come live with you in that gorgeous penthouse. You have the room. You have the money. You can save me. Thomas has lost absolutely everything. His massive arrogance just destroyed our entire retirement. We do not have a single dime left to our names. Brandon is getting a vicious divorce, and he is going to a federal prison. The government is going to seize whatever microscopic assets they have left. I have absolutely nothing left in this world. I cannot live in a homeless shelter. I cannot live in a cheap motel. You are my daughter, Olivia. You have a moral obligation to take care of me. You cannot just leave your own mother out in the cold. You have to protect me from him. You have to fix this disaster." I looked down at the weeping, hysterical woman clinging desperately to my winter coat. I searched the absolute deepest corners of my heart for even a single ounce of sympathy, a solitary drop of maternal connection, or a brief flicker of familial obligation. I searched for the little girl who used to crave this woman's validation more than oxygen. But I found absolutely nothing. The emotional well had run completely dry. Staring at her pathetic display, my mind immediately flashed back to that fateful Thanksgiving dinner 5 years ago. I vividly remembered the exact triumphant tone of her voice when she tapped her crystal wine glass with a silver spoon. I remembered how proudly she celebrated handing my brother $140,000 of their retirement savings while openly mocking my financial stability. I remembered how she smiled a cruel, satisfied smirk when my father looked me dead in the eye and told me my future was entirely worthless. She had fully endorsed my marginalization. She had nurtured the golden child while starving her daughter. Now the feast was over and she was starving. I reached down and firmly grasped her wrists. I did not yank or pull violently. I did not need to use aggression because I held all the genuine power. I gently, but with absolute unbreakable authority, pried her desperate, trembling fingers off the luxurious fabric of my coat. I removed her grip, severing her physical connection to me, and let her hands drop limply back down to her sides. She stared up at me, her chest heaving with panicked, ragged breaths, waiting for me to offer her salvation. I looked her directly in the eyes, my expression a mask of flawless, chilling indifference. "You are a single woman now, Mom," I said, my voice carrying the exact same cold, dismissive cadence my father had used against me all those years ago. Owning property is a complete waste for you. Just rent somewhere. Cynthia gasped loudly, violently sucking in the damp garage air, as if I had driven a physical blade directly into her chest. The sheer, undeniable poetry of the callback paralyzed her completely. She instantly recognized her husband's exact words. She recognized the brutal, undeniable karma wrapping tightly around her throat, choking the life out of her final, desperate manipulation. The realization hit her with devastating clarity. I was not going to save her. I was returning the exact same cruel energy they had freely given me when I needed them most. Her mouth opened and closed silently, unable to formulate a single argument against the flawless execution of her own toxic logic. She was finally experiencing the exact same profound, terrifying rejection she had forced me to endure. I did not offer her another word of comfort. I did not offer her a tissue to dry her ruined, tear-streaked makeup. I turned my back on her and reached for the chrome door handle of my luxury vehicle. I pulled the heavy door open and slid gracefully into the plush driver's seat. I was immediately surrounded by the rich scent of expensive leather and the comforting quiet hum of the powerful engine coming to life. I reached out and pulled the heavy door shut, a solid, satisfying thud that officially sealed me inside a safe, prosperous world she would never, ever be allowed to enter. I engaged the transmission, put the car in drive, and smoothly pulled away from the concrete pillar. As I drove slowly toward the exit ramp, I glanced up into my rearview mirror. I watched my mother kneeling completely alone in the dim, flickering fluorescent light of the underground parking garage. Her shoulders were shaking violently as she sobbed into her empty hands. The devastating consequences of her lifelong cruelty and financial ignorance had finally crushed her entirely. She was totally abandoned, surrounded only by the exhaust fumes and cold concrete. I held her gaze in the mirror for one final fleeting second before turning the steering wheel and guiding my car up the steep, winding ramp. As my vehicle emerged from the dark subterranean garage and merged out into the crisp, clear Chicago afternoon, a profound physical sensation washed over my entire body. The heavy toxic chains that had bound me to the relentless expectations of that family for 32 years shattered completely. The invisible weight that had constantly pressed down on my chest simply evaporated into the fresh city air. I was finally unequivocally free. I drove through the bustling, vibrant city streets feeling an overwhelming sense of limitless potential. I had survived their betrayal, outsmarted their greed, and completely dismantled their fraudulent empire. Now I was ready to build a legacy that actually mattered. I spent the evening celebrating with Elijah and my corporate team, toasting to the successful defense of my business and the absolute end of my familial obligations. A smooth, seamless transition begins. 6 months have rapidly passed since the explosive confrontation in that underground parking garage. The harsh, bitter winter has entirely melted away, replaced by the vibrant, promising warmth of early summer. The city is alive with energy mirroring the incredible internal transformation I have experienced since completely severing those toxic ties. My real estate portfolio has continued to expand aggressively, bringing in record-breaking revenue every single month without fail. I am standing proudly in front of a massive, newly renovated brick building located on the bustling south side of the city. The morning sun is shining brightly, illuminating the crisp, freshly painted exterior facade and the large, excited crowd gathering on the wide concrete sidewalk. The atmosphere is buzzing with genuine joy, vibrant community anticipation, and a deep sense of shared purpose. Today is a highly anticipated grand opening event. I am wearing a stunning, perfectly tailored white suit standing behind a wide crimson ribbon stretched across the double glass doors of the facility. I am holding a pair of oversized, shiny, ceremonial scissors in my right hand, waiting patiently for the absolute perfect moment to proudly reveal my ultimate, undeniable, and truly lasting legacy to the entire watching world. I close the heavy steel blades of the ceremonial scissors. The crisp sound of the thick crimson ribbon slicing in half echoes sharply through the warm morning air. The large crowd gathered on the wide concrete sidewalk immediately erupts into thunderous applause and genuine enthusiastic cheering. I hand the shiny scissors to my executive assistant and take a slow, deeply satisfying look at the magnificent brick building standing tall right in front of me. This is not just another lucrative addition to my expanding corporate real estate portfolio. This specific property represents the absolute pinnacle of my personal and professional redemption. It is a beautifully renovated state-of-the-art, multi-family residential property located in a rapidly revitalizing neighborhood. I purchased this massive building using a very specific, highly symbolic pool of liquid capital. I funded this entire acquisition using the exact $140,000 profit margin I generated from flipping my brother's foreclosed suburban estate. I took the exact sum of money my parents had weaponized against me 5 years ago and transformed it into a permanent fortress of empowerment. This building is now the official headquarters for a fully funded transitional housing program I personally established and oversee. We provide safe, luxurious, heavily subsidized apartments for young women who are actively escaping severe financial abuse and toxic family environments. We give them the secure foundation they desperately need to build their own independent wealth, ensuring they never have to rely on manipulative relatives or abusive partners just to keep a roof over their heads. I even teach weekly financial literacy classes in the main lobby, showing them exactly how to build bulletproof credit and invest in their futures. Seeing these strong, hopeful women walk through the newly opened glass doors naturally brings my mind back to the people who tried to destroy my future. The extreme contrast between my current reality and their miserable existence is stark, undeniable, and profoundly poetic. The universe delivered its brutal, unyielding justice with absolute surgical precision. Brandon is currently living in a cheap, rundown motel located off a noisy, constantly congested interstate highway. He managed to avoid a lengthy federal prison sentence by accepting a devastating plea deal, but the financial consequences were absolute and totally inescapable. He currently works a grueling, low-level retail job stocking shelves on the overnight shift, but he barely sees a fraction of his meager paycheck. His wages are aggressively garnished every single month by the government to pay back massive tax penalties and institutional fines resulting from his highly fraudulent mortgage application. He is trapped in a permanent, unyielding cycle of poverty, entirely stripped of the unearned arrogance and smug superiority that defined his entire life. He has no assets, no credit, and absolutely no future. Jasmine suffered an equally spectacular, highly public, and utterly humiliating downfall. Her carefully curated, deeply fake career as a luxury lifestyle influencer imploded in a matter of days. After she attempted to launch that vicious digital smear campaign against my company, Elijah, unleashed a specialized team of ruthless private investigators. They uncovered her massive network of fake followers, purchased engagement, and totally fraudulent product reviews. A powerful coalition of prominent local realtors and former brand sponsors publicly exposed her lies on every major social media platform. She was permanently blacklisted from the entire industry, completely disgraced and entirely stripped of her glamorous digital persona. Without Brandon's stolen money to fund her severe shopping addiction, the crippling reality of her massive credit card debt finally crushed her. She now works an exhausting minimum-wage customer service job, forced to deal with angry people all day long, while wearing a cheap, scratchy polyester uniform instead of imported designer silk. Her marriage to the golden child dissolved in a bitter, highly contested divorce, where they fought ruthlessly in court over the miserable, worthless scraps of their ruined lives. But the most profound, deeply satisfying fall from grace belongs entirely to my parents. Thomas and Cynthia are the literal textbook definition of absolute, irreversible financial ruin. Their desperate, malicious attempt to steal my wealth and cover up their federal crimes completely bankrupted them. They were forced to liquidate every single remaining asset they possessed just to pay for the massive legal defense required to keep themselves and their golden son out of a federal penitentiary. They filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy, permanently destroying whatever tiny shred of financial dignity they had left. The wealthy suburban country club friends they spent decades trying to impress completely abandoned them, the very second the public scandal broke on the local news. They are now completely ostracized from their former social circles, treated like absolute pariahs by the very people they used to brag to at dinner parties. Today, Thomas and Cynthia rent a tiny, cramped, deeply depressing one-bedroom apartment on the far industrial edge of the city. They survive strictly on fixed, meager Social Security incomes, forced to count every single penny just to afford basic groceries and utility bills. They live in a constant, endless state of bitter, suffocating resentment, blaming each other daily for the catastrophic collapse of their perfect family illusion. Thomas blames Cynthia for indulging Brandon, while Cynthia screams at Thomas for orchestrating the fraudulent gift letter. They have absolutely no power, no money, and no lasting legacy. They selfishly threw away their only loyal, hardworking daughter to protect a massive financial fraud, and they ended up with exactly what they deserved. Absolutely nothing. I pushed those dark thoughts away, refusing to let their miserable existence take up any more space in my peaceful mind. I turned my attention back to the vibrant, joyful celebration happening all around me on the sunlit sidewalk. Elijah walks up to stand beside me, looking incredibly sharp in his tailored charcoal suit. He holds two crystal flutes filled with incredibly expensive sparkling champagne. He hands one to me, offering a warm, genuine smile of profound professional respect and shared victory. "We actually did it," Elijah says, his deep voice filled with quiet, undeniable pride. "You built an absolute real estate empire from the ground up, and you did it entirely on your own terms." I take the crystal flute, the cool glass grounding me in the beautiful present moment. I look out at the diverse, supportive crowd of dedicated colleagues, local business leaders, and the brave young women who are moving into the facility today. I am surrounded by a community that genuinely respects my sharp intellect, values my professional contributions, and enthusiastically celebrates my undeniable success. I take a slow, satisfying sip of the champagne, letting the sweet, crisp taste wash over me. In this perfect sunlit moment, a profound realization settles deeply into my soul. For 32 years, I viewed my family's cruel, relentless rejection as a heavy, suffocating curse. I falsely believed their constant criticism and blatant favoritism were insurmountable obstacles deliberately designed to keep me small, quiet, and completely insignificant. But standing here today looking at the towering brick building I own entirely free and clear, I finally understand the absolute truth. Their toxic betrayal was never a curse. It was the ultimate necessary catalyst. Their callous demand that I go rent a cheap apartment while they blindly handed my brother a fortune was the exact spark that ignited my relentless drive. It forced me to stop seeking their flawed conditional validation. It forced me to trust my own brilliant mind and build an impenetrable fortress they could never ever breach. I look up at the bright, cloudless blue sky stretching endlessly over the beautiful, bustling city of Chicago. My heart is completely light, entirely free from the heavy, toxic chains of the past. I have successfully navigated the darkest, most treacherous waters of familial betrayal and emerged not just victorious, but absolutely untouchable. This journey has taught me the most valuable, enduring lesson of my entire life. The greatest, most satisfying revenge is never found in screaming matches, petty retaliation, or actively trying to destroy toxic people. The ultimate revenge is simply stepping completely out of their dark, suffocating shadow. It is letting them utterly destroy themselves with their own unchecked greed, malicious arrogance, and profound financial ignorance. It is taking the exact heavy stones they threw at you and using them to quietly, meticulously build an unshakable, magnificent empire. It is taking your own remarkable success, your sharp intellect, and your unbreakable spirit, and using them to construct a beautiful, prosperous life they can never ever touch. I raise my glass toward the clear blue sky, offering a silent toast to the woman I used to be. She was so terribly afraid of losing a family that never truly valued her in the first place. She did not know her own power yet. But the woman standing here today knows exactly who she is. I am an unstoppable force of nature, and my incredible journey has truly just begun.